And according to the agenda, yes, we do have the opening ceremonies. We had public comment before the opening ceremony. Anybody in the audience wish to address the board on something not on the agenda? Most specifically, Tony? No. Jean?
No.
Jean?
No.
Are you going to address this? Okay, we'll get through the public comment then for the time being. And that was recorded. I hope I did it okay. Anyway, we'll get on to item B, opening ceremony. If you'll all please rise and join Supervisor Alba in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Almighty God, we pray this day for your ever-enduring guidance, cloak us in wisdom and fortitude, that we may disperse our knowledge and facts intelligently among all humanity of whom we serve. Amen. Do we have to approve the agenda or anything, or we're just not there,
Yeah,
so.
we haven't done that in the past.
Okay, very good. We're going to move in then to our 9 a.m. public hearing, and that's the budget public hearing. Subject is the fiscal year budget for 2013-14, and of course the action requested ultimately, after what may be 3 or 4 days, is to adopt the resolution establishing the appropriations limit in the amount of $29,557 $557,470 for FY 2013-2014. And obviously, we're going to have department presentations over the next couple of days. And as a matter of introductory comments, at least from the chair and the chair of the budget committee, actually, I welcome this exercise. I realize that some may find it a little bit tedious, but I think, as Supervisor Chapman reminds us each and every year, and I do agree with him, this is about the most important thing we do in setting county priorities. And hopefully those priorities are the same priorities that the constituents have as well. So I take this very seriously and looking forward to it. I think there are 2 issues before us. One obviously is this year's budget, and then a corollary or secondary issue, and something that we will address over the next year, is seeing a paradigm shift in the way the county delivers services. Because as has been noted for the last, I don't know, anybody can correct me, 4 or 5 years, Karen, something like that, we have been spending more than we've been taking in. We've been fortunate to have a number of cash balances to carry forward, one-time monies in the budget, and therefore have been able to continue to keep the county running and doing what I believe is a responsible job with the assets available to us and the trust that the citizens place in us. But it can't go on forever, so consequently we've got to see some increased revenues, which may be on the horizon. But we also have to have a different way of delivering services and spending those scarce dollars. So with that said, I'd open it up to board members. Anybody have anything to add? Bob?
You did good.
I think that the $3 million that was quoted earlier probably was the top end. And we, through the diligence of those working on it, Regina, and Julie, Karen, Richard, and the rest of them, and Marty, obviously, I think we're starting to move everything in the right direction, and I'm confident that we can complete the budgetary process and go ahead and keep the doors open, keep services going, and I think we'll have a good year. But anyway, Larry, you have anything you'd like to add before we get started? Okay. Supervisor Alba?
No.
Jim?
I just have a brief comment, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
And first of all, I appreciate your leadership on the budget committee, and also Mr. Pyle working with the staff to try to get some basic numbers to work with. The budget is a work in progress, and the interesting thing is the numbers you guys look at and the scenarios you looked at in July changed in August, and the August scenarios change in September, and I guarantee you no matter what we adopt today or this week, that they will be changed in October and January and April of next year. I mean, it was,
Well, they should.
yeah,
Well, they
it's an ongoing type of a process. We have basic services that we are committed to having to fund and to maintain. That's our primary reason for being here as a governmental entity. In law enforcement has been probably the dominant one as far as the local resources being utilized. We receive a fairly large chunk of change from the state and federal government, mostly the federal government as it relates to health and social services. And obviously that's to provide, hopefully, for a little bit better quality of life for some of our citizens who depend upon those particular funds. And those are operational programs that have operational dollars. And I think it's important as we go through this exercise, as we sort out what each of these departments' demands and needs are, is that we have operational funds and then we have these one-time only monies. And a lot of times the one-time only monies are designed or targeted or focus on infrastructure and other kind of improvements that don't have ongoing maintenance or staffing costs. And so, you know, in the past, you know, as you've indicated in your opening remarks, in terms of we have more revenues than we've had expenditures in terms of over the time period, and our carryover funds provide those. And then you go through years and where your revenues don't meet your expenditures and you rely upon the monies that you kind of set aside in previous years, and that's basically where we've been in the last 2 to 5 years. Is we're debt-free. We don't have a lot of fancy things that we've paid for and have stressed our cash flow, and we've been able to weather the recession. And so I think as we go through this here, we need to look at how those one-time only monies are going to be allocated and invested, either to, you know, maybe enhance the compensation of our workforce, or to provide new facilities, improve facilities for our citizens. But I think we need to, and this board has been successful in the past working with administrative staff, avoided using one-time only monies to fund operational type expenses. In other words, paying for those basic services. And if our revenue stream doesn't sustain the operational forces, I think we need to look at how we can make those more efficient and probably even, if necessary, curtail them if that's what the revenues dictate, and not see the services being necessarily propped up by one-time only monies, because that's not really what the intent was for those particular funds. And so it's easy to kind of blend everything together, and it's easy to generalize everything. Oh yeah, we have $100 million and, you know, we've got all this money to spend. A lot of it is already pre-allocated and predetermined as to how it can be spent. But as far as the discretionary dollars that we have, you know, and the other thing that kind of is going to be something I'm going to be focusing on as we go through the next couple of days is the departments that have operational deficits. You know, it's kind of intriguing to me when we have the discussion and we say, you know, the operational deficit today is a lot less than what it was maybe 5 years ago. Some of these departments, in particular, you know, maybe we're running $500,000 to $700,000 in the red, and then we were having to shift funds from other areas to be able to cover, to maintain those services. And in part because the funding stream that they normally enjoyed had been superseded or usurped by the state for a variety of reasons, or they heaped on us additional responsibilities but no monies to pay for it, is what drives a lot of these, those kind of deficits. And you know, now maybe they've got the deficits down to 100,000 or 200,000, and you know, oh, aren't we doing a good job because we're, you know, our deficit's less than what it used to be? Well, I think what we have to do is to tune into the significance of those ongoing deficits, and at some point, you know, you can only bridge so much, so we may have to look at some drastic changes in the way business is doing, because to institutionalize into the budget an expectation of this entity or that function or that program automatically operates with a deficit, so therefore they get first dibs on whatever the new revenues that might be out there, or the available revenues or the one-time only monies to back them up, it doesn't work. I mean, I think that disserves all the other interests that are clamoring to be part of or in the budget. And so I think those are the things I'm going to be looking for.
Yeah, that's a paradigm shift, I think, that we've got to make, whether we make it with
We
this
do.
budget or
Yeah.
discuss it and make it in the
We
future.
may not necessarily be able to implement those kind of changes on such short
Right,
time frame.
right.
But I think it's incumbent upon us to have that discussion this week, and so we can give direction to Marty and the rest of the administrative team to look at coming back with how we're going to shift away from, having, the commitments that were made 20 years ago, may not fit the needs and priorities of today. And just as the board 20 years ago, we were dealing with commitments that were made 20 years before that and had to make shifts and changes. In some cases, commitment changes that were, maybe 70 or 80 years old. And I relate one in particular is that the county operated the library system. That was something that came into existence back in the 19-teens,
That did most
1920s,
counties. Yeah.
as did most counties. And given the ERAF program that the state shoved down local government's throats back in 92, 93, that era, 91, 92, 93. By 1993, the board basically zeroed out any sort of funding for the library. It was a huge paradigm shift. But that's an example of where, from a point of view of allocating resources, just because we've always spent money in a particular area doesn't mean that we have to continue spending money in a particular area if it is not meeting satisfactory budgetary goals. And so I would hope the board, we analyze and have the discussions with the various departments that we, critically have the discussion, is what you're doing, of paramount importance. Now, most of them are going to come in and tell you, if I can guarantee 100% of them will tell you that their budget unit is the most important budget unit in the county budget, without fail. But we have to kind of analyze in conjunction with others, is this really where we want to be spending our money? And what do we do to, there's some programs that have struggled for years and never had any consideration at all. Maybe they need to have their turn in the sunshine, and maybe some of those programs need to be enhanced, and others who haven't been successful at generating the dollars to support their activity need to be de-emphasized. And, so anyway, I see that as the task that we have at hand, and as you can see, I'm prepared and ready.
We
I
would
like-
be, Jim, we assumed that would be the case.
I like having these kind of discussions. It's the best week of the board year.
That's a matter of Yes, Supervisor Watson.
I like the phrase de-emphasize, that's a fancy word for cut.
Stay
Okay.
around long enough where your vocabulary will expand.
Sometimes it's better just to cut and chase. Okay, thank you very much, Supervisor Chapman. I think then we'll turn it over to Marty and Julie and kind of get an overall view, if you will, and before we entertain. Obviously, most of you are aware that we have a rough schedule, if you will, and that schedule is subject to adjustment. We're going to take up the sheriff and probation this morning, and then Public Works and Roads, Public Defender, Planning and Building Services, Economic Development, Housing this afternoon. So, but for those who might be listening on the intranet or whatever it is, do be prepared for changes because they may occur. So, Julie, would you like to?
Sure, let me
Or
start.
Marty, sure. Thank you very much. By the way, I'd like to again recognize Julie and Regina and the rest of the staff, Karen and your staff, everybody and Richard that's helped out get us this far along on the deliberation. So thank you.
First, I'm glad you said that. I mean, there is an extreme amount of work that goes out. in
Especially
getting
this
ready
year.
for these things.
There
I mean,
has been,
just looking at compiling, the books are, hours and hours of work with Julie and Regina, and my appreciation to them for getting this prepared. As you meet, you want to give yourself as many options as possible as you go through this process. And I suggest that as each of the departments stands up, you probably want to ask them at least 3 questions. Maybe the first is, what is your lowest priority if you happen to get something up during this process, and what will be the consequences of that program or expenditure being eliminated? But I think you also need to recognize that budgeting is a multi-year process, and as Supervisor Chapman said, you want to look over the time horizon also. You want to kind of anticipate the problems that you're going to have going forward. So you might want to also ask each of the departments, what are your major unmet needs? I mean, what are the things that are not getting done because of lack of resources? And maybe third is, as Mr. Department Head, as you look out over the next couple of years, or what do you see heading our way that we're eventually going to have to deal with, so you can put this year's process, into perspective. I also encourage you to ask each department head if there are revenues that can be adjusted as part of their budget. That will at least give you the option of dealing, with the budget, in ways of trying to find some additional things that potentially we could charge for. And of course, that is sustainable. That improves your situation going forward. In the end, you only have a few options when it comes down to it. And one is, sort of cut operational expenses in departments. Two is really ask the employees for concessions. Three is raise revenues. And four is use one-time revenues, sort of bridge the gap, which I think we all talked about a number of times. Gets you through the moment, but of course pushes the problem off into the next year. So, keep those in mind and ask those questions as you go forward and give yourself some perspective to the budget.
And it will probably end up being a combination of those things that are available to us.
Julie has some changes and.
By the way, I'm sorry that Supervisor Pyle didn't get the memo on the blue shirts, by the way.
I didn't, no.
Well,
I got blue in it.
You got blue.
Well, Mr. Chairman, somebody has to be the odd man out.
Ooh. Ooh.
Worth repeating.
Okay.
We were talking that way.
We wanted to add a little levity to the whole thing,
Was
so.
that swimming pool blue or was that?
Oh, ooh, we had the odd man out, the swimming pool blue. Oh.
I didn't say that.
You're right, we have a vote at the end of this.
And it's obvious from the color of the shirts that your vote's gonna be on the short end.
Oh, my. Okay, Julie. Thank you.
You could go home and change at lunchtime.
I look at your tie to see what your attitude would be.
Right, exactly. I always bring these ties, right.
I wait for the day we vote to wear the tie. It'll either be the Three Stooges.
There's a message in your ties. Okay, Julie.
Mine has begun.
Okay. I do have a few changes. I haven't made any changes, and thank you to our wonderful IT department. I'm completely connected to a live working document, so I can make any changes that the board should see fit. I have not made changes, even though, like Jim said, this does change almost daily, weekly, because things just change. But I do have a couple changes of fund balance, and then one formula error that the auditor's office pointed out to me. I had changed one thing. It doesn't change the bottom line. It's a very small thing, but I didn't want to make any changes after the time I printed the binder until we started here. So I do have a lower general fund balance due to a transfer that had to be completed before the close of the year. So it's a negative 139. So I'm going to go ahead and change that now. So we have a fund balance in the general fund of 952, 160. So that's going to change it, and I made this, try to make it as big as I could for everybody, so I'm lucky I can look here. Also, there's a positive change in the probation fund to their fund balance. Down there, so, and it's helpful, so their new fund balance is 172,100.
Which lane is that?
Probation's 145, fund 145, so it's 172,100. And I just feel, if we know what it is today, let's make this document the best we can. So I'm recommending that we put those in so we know for sure what we're dealing with, which helps the probation fund. And then I do have that one formula error in Title III, right here.
Can you show everybody where that page is in the book?
The summary page?
Yes.
Sure. It's,
Under tab one,
yep.
the second or third yellow. There you go.
It's in color. It's the one with the yellow and the red.
Okay, so before you move too fast, let's, I want to write that in. So the general fund.
Revenue by fund,
Yeah.
revenue the yellow page.
Yeah, that, The $1,091,000 that changed to what?
$952,160.
$952,160?
Yes.
Bump up. General operating fund, instead of $1,091,000, your estimated fund balance, you got $952,160. You're right, there you go.
Now, what was the nature of those first two changes that you made before you do your formula? Why?
It has to do with transfers that were budgeted for last year before the close of the books, so the transfers needed to occur. So their transfers, fund balance is based after accounts payable and accounts receivable all are finalized.
Right.
All the books for last year kind of closed like here in
Right.
late July.
Right.
Right.
Actually, we closed them just last week. Last week in August is when we typically do. We have a 60-day accrual period after June 30th, so we try to get everything in that we can.
So the memo you send out to all the departments there in the last part of June, haranguing them to have all their paperwork done, so that you can close out the books is sort of kind of like a shot over the bow, but really is not.
That's right. I do that for fun,
You do that for fun?
yes.
In effect?
And, yeah,
Okay.
but we do have, like I said, the 60-day period to keep the books open is pretty much standard to local government.
Yeah, no, I don't have a problem with that, I just, I know when you see that email that goes out, how everybody starts scrambling, but.
Right. Well, yeah, we do ask them to submit it, and then it takes us time to audit it and then enter it into the system so we can roll the year.
So there are no more changes allowable now?
Very few. So until the books are, we're now putting our financial statements together, and if we find anything that needs to be corrected, we'll still have the opportunity to make that correction.
So in the expenditure side under Title III, I moved, the total's the same, I just have to fix this formula, it
What
wasn't
page is
picking up.
that, 107?
Title III is under tab 2, and it's fund number 142, so they're numeric order under tab 2. And it's just the formula didn't add the 10,000 when I broke it out to a transfer out, so I'm gonna go ahead and fix this. That's what it should be. And then the department request, it's just when I moved the 10,000 here to where it needed to be classified, it didn't change the formula. I added that line and I didn't change the formula. So it doesn't change the bottom line, that's what we have to allocate. So I'm gonna save those.
So it's 146?
146.
Mhm.
So, okay, so it was 146 in the request, but it dropped by 10,000 in the CAO was recommended, so you're fixing that.
Yes. And that's all I have at this point. Just those two, but I figure, like I said, we need to be working with the best we know at this point, and I'd like to do that.
Maybe get those updates.
So that was Fund 142?
Correct.
Yeah.
I moved to that.
146 went to what? 140.
It was 146 originally, and then I moved 10,000 down, and I just didn't, the total was saying 136 and not including the 10, so it should be 146
Okay.
in that budget unit. So that would be this one.
With those corrections, then, Julie, I know it gets dangerous, we ask for, and I'm not looking for detail, but are there any other, whether it be in the revenue side or the expenditure side, anything extraordinary that we ought to know at this time, or should we just take the departments one at a time? I think the numbers kind of speak for themselves in there.
Extraordinary as in,
Extraordinary changes from last year on the revenue side, for instance.
I think we can talk about them. There was a couple I'm not sure if I put those in a memo in here. I recall this
So
one.
it might Might be on the top of your head if they were good or bad.
Well, PILT is higher than it has been,
Right.
so that's the one different, and that's a very positive thing. It's higher than it's been typically.
That money's already come in, so
Right.
it's not like an expectation, it's,
The expectation, in fact, may be reversed, you know, that we may not. see.
that's one of the few funds where we actually have the money come in before it's spent rather than on the credit. While we're, Mr. Chairman, if we
Yeah,
could,
go ahead.
on page 1 of the
Yeah,
fiscal strategies page, which is right after the budget resolution,
Yep.
it's got some numbers in here. And so I think before we get too deep, and it might help us with our departmental
I agree with you.
discussions too, is to talk about the teeter proceeds, property tax penalties and interest, and there's up above on the transaction strategy, and then down about mid-page, there's some additional teeter references being made and broken down into one-time sources as well as annual sources. And I'd like to have, if possible, Karen and the rest of the appropriate staff, whoever it may be, Richard or Marty, let's talk about how the teeter thing works, because what I've listened to in the past and what I'm hearing now that we have the prospect of maybe the biggest delinquent taxpayer paying their taxes, having those monies now come into the mix, which obviously are one-time only funds, how those monies, because for the last several years, 5-6 years, I've been told that, don't be busting the chops of these folks to pay their taxes, because it's great interest that we're earning at 18%. You can't get those kind of dollars like in terms of a normal conventional bank savings or whatever may be available for instruments for earning money on your money. And so now that we are at a point where those are prospectively could go to tax sale and or maybe be redeemed by newer owners, those monies now become available. And it's kind of troublesome to me to be told that maybe a third of the money may be available for the general fund, that these monies are now being and I just like to know what the law requires as a minimum, what the practice is in terms of general, and if we have administrative policies that earmark the monies and pigeonhole them here or there, that let's talk about what those are and who makes those policies and who really sets those policies so that we can appreciate. So, I like to know going into this, do I have $3 million to spend or do I have $30,000 to spend? So, there's a big difference there. After being told that we have to be patient waiting for, earning all this money,
Right.
and now being told.
It was an eye-opener.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was. I was
So-
Oh, the 3
flabbergasted.
million for, okay,
Go ahead, Karen.
go ahead.
Well, let's
Okay.
operate with the assumption with the dire amount of monies being, let's
Somehow.
assume over the course of the next this current fiscal year, that those 3 million, 3.5 million, whatever it is, that would be due and payable. Part of it is tax, part of it is penalties, and part of it is interest.
Correct.
Okay, all of a sudden, if somebody walks in and writes out the check and
Right.
clears the account with Mr. Egan, what happens to that money?
Okay. Well, first, let me say, we've been on the teeter plan. The teeter is an alternative method of property tax allocation. Basically, each year at the beginning of the year, when the secured tax roll is prepared, we know what the total levy is, the total amount billed, and we prepare to apportion that in advance throughout the year, rather than when it's based on what's collected. We used to collect it prior to teeter. We used